Hi friends, it's Laurie. I'm so happy you stopped by today. I'll be making a red truck glass dessert tray, 3 rustic Christmas trees, and a holiday farmhouse wreath. I used Dollar Tree supplies along with some things that I had on hand. I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. To start my dessert tray, I'm actually recycling one of my Yankee candles. I filled my jar about halfway with really hot water. This melted the excess wax, which rose to the top, and once the water was cool, I just scooped it out and then cleaned my jar. Now that it's ready, I'll only be using the base for this project. You can pretty much use any glass container for this dessert tray, just make sure that it's thick enough to hold weight. I needed something small enough to fit inside the jar, and I found this cute little red farmhouse truck at the Dollar Tree. I wanted to place some festive Christmas trees in the back of my truck, so I'm using 3 of these from this pack of Dollar Tree Christmas ornaments. They were really easy to remove, they just kind of popped off, and now I'm attaching all 3 to the back of the truck bed using my glue gun. I let the hot glue cool completely, and now to attach it to the bottom of the base, I'll be using some E6000. I placed a generous amount on the bottom of my jar and then attached the truck. When I was done, I set it aside and I let it set up for a couple of hours. To mimic the truck driving in snow, I'm using some of the white sand from the Dollar Tree. I didn't want to fill it in too much, so I added about 3 teaspoons. To finish up, I'm using a 7.5-inch clear plate, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I'm once again using some E6000. I placed it on the end of a wooden skewer and I added it to the top rim of the base. I then attached the plate, making sure to center it on the top. I added on some cookies and now it's ready for the holidays. Today, I'm participating in my monthly friend collab group, and the theme is Christmas in July. It's being hosted by my sweet friend Liana from Liana DIY, and our co-host this month is Dave from Dave's Wreaths and Things. They both have amazing channels, and you can check them out along with my other crafty friends. I'll have the playlist linked below in my description. If you're stopping by for the first time, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. And to all my returning friends, I'm always so happy to see you. To make my Farmhouse Christmas wreath, I'm using one of the 14-inch wire wreath forms from the Dollar Tree. For the base of my wreath, I'm using 8 bunches of the nautical rope, and these came from the Dollar Tree as well. I'm using the larger rope. There are 2 sizes, so depending on which size you choose, you may use a little more or a little less. I'm using my ruler and cutting my rope into 6-inch pieces. When you're done, you'll have a bunch of 6-inch pieces of nautical cut rope. To attach them, I'm first sliding one piece between the middle wire and the inside wire. I make sure both ends are even. I then add some hot glue to the bottom and enough on both sides to attach the 2 pieces of rope together. I now slide my next piece on the open inside wire next to my first and on the outside. Make sure that both ends are even. And now once again, I'm adding enough hot glue on the bottom and the two sides to attach the two pieces together. I'm now adding on my third piece next to my first, once again sliding it between the middle and the inside wire, making sure the ends are even and attaching them together with my glue gun. I then added on my fourth, following the same instructions as I worked my way around the form. I did place down a piece of waxed paper because some of the hot glue can drip between the pieces of the cut rope. When pinching the rope together, be aware of where the hot glue is so you don't burn your fingers, and you will have to hold the rope together until the hot glue sets up. It usually takes about 10 seconds or so. I attached 10 ropes on the outside wires and 9 on the inside. But depending on the thickness of your rope, that may vary. I continued working my way around and I finally finished up adding on my last piece. Some of the rope will fray as you're attaching it, but usually not enough, so I'm working my way around the form, unwinding the strands. I'm gently pulling each of them apart, so in the end my wreath has a nice full appearance. When you're done, if you do find some pieces that aren't even on the outside or the inside, you can always snip them off with your scissors. You can pretty much use this wreath for any season. I'm making mine a Christmas wreath, so I'm going to be adding on some accents. I'm making a bow for my wreath, and I'm starting with some natural 4-inch burlap that came from burlapfabric.com. It's a quality burlap, and I will have the company linked below in case you'd like to check it out. Adding to it, I'm also using a 1 1/2 inch Christmas ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I'm using my bow maker that I picked up on Amazon a while back, and I'm giving myself 2 12-inch tails and 2 6-inch loops. For the Christmas ribbon, I'm giving myself 2 12-inch tails and 4 6-inch loops. There's not much ribbon left on the spool, so I'm making 2 7-inch tails and 2 3-inch loops. To attach my bow together, I'm using a piece of floral wire long enough to wrap around the wreath. I placed it over the center of the bow, pulled back tightly, and twisted it together. I then fluffed out all the loops and cut the tails at an angle. Attaching the bow to my wreath, I'm placing the 2 wires over the top and twisting them together tightly on the back. I'm adding some greenery to my wreath, and I'm using 2 of these winter picks that I had on hand. The only problem is they have blue berries on them, and I want them to be red to match the holly on my ribbon. To change them up, I grabbed some red acrylic paint and I gave each of them a coat. What a difference a little paint makes, And when it was dry, I then tucked the stems under the bow. I cut off the excess wire and then hot glued them into place. I'm adding on a little more greenery using 2 stems that I had on hand and then some rosemary from the Dollar Tree. I tucked the 2 larger stems under the greenery and hot glued them into place. I then cut the rosemary separate from the main stem and attached it to the wreath. I added some hot glue to help hold them in place, and now that I'm done, this pretty farmhouse Christmas rope wreath is ready for the holidays. To start my white Christmas tree, I'm using one of the Dollar Tree's 6-inch 0.9 styrofoam cones. It has a flat top and I need to give it a bit of a point, so I'm using 2 of the Dollar Tree's tumbling tower blocks. I used my scissors and poked a deep hole in the top. And then I filled it with hot glue. I then tucked both of the tumbling tower blocks inside, and don't worry if the styrofoam cracks a little bit because it's going to be hidden. To wrap my tree, I'm using one of the Dollar Tree's white duster pads. I wrapped it around the foam tree to find my size, and I cut off the extra. I then added some hot glue to the cone and wrapped the duster tightly around it. To cover the top of my tree, I'm using the leftover duster piece. I added some hot glue to the top and made sure that the lower seam and the upper seam matched up. With the glue in place, I wrapped the upper piece tightly around the top. To hide the top, I just added on some hot glue and I pulled the white over it. With my tree covered in white, I used my scissors to just kind of clean up any of the uneven ends. I'm using some white fairy lights that I had on hand, and I'm wrapping them around my tree. To finish up, I'm using an old tin star that I had on hand. You can always use a wooden one, and I attached it to the top. To make my rustic wood tree, I headed outside and I picked up the straightest sticks I could find. For this project, I'm using a 7-inch styrofoam cone. This has a pointed top, unlike the Dollar Tree, and I found it was much easier to attach the sticks to this one. I measured my sticks against the cone and cut them about an inch or so above the top. I kept measuring and cutting until I had a pile of sticks. Attaching the sticks to the cone is super easy. I place down a generous amount of hot glue and then just attach the stick. Because I wanted the sticks standing as straight as possible, I didn't attach them next to each other, but instead I added them randomly around the cone. I worked my way around the cone, doing my best to keep the sticks straight and to fill in all those open spaces. Don't worry if it's not perfectly straight, because that's what makes this tree unique. Now that I have most of the white covered, I'm cutting shorter sticks and filling in those open spaces. I used my clippers to clean up the top of the tree and cut them into a point. You can add as many sticks on as you'd like, making your tree thin or thick. I'm adding some of my thinner branches now and just filling in between the sticks. To finish off the top of my tree, I used one of my larger sticks, and with my clippers, I clipped it into a point. I added some hot glue to the top and then just pushed it inside. You can leave the tree natural, but I'm using some white acrylic paint to mimic snow. I want to keep the natural grain of the wood, so I just dabbed on some white paint and rubbed it in with my fingers. You can add on as little or as much as you'd like, and when I was done, I just set it aside and let it dry. To finish up, I'm using a rusty star that I had on hand. You can always paint a wooden star and use that instead. I added some hot glue and attached it on the top. To make my burlap Christmas tree, I'm using one of the Dollar Tree's styrofoam cones. I'm using two colors of burlap, one white and one natural, and these came from burlapfabric.com. I'll have the company linked below. The natural burlap is 4-inch and the white is 6-inch. These are what I had on hand, and you can use either size. I cut my burlap into 5-inch lengths and then removed the finished edges. I folded my fabric in half on the longest side and then cut it. I now have two pieces. I folded both of those in half and cut them as well. I made 30 of them, but depending upon how tightly you add them to the cone, you may need a few more or a few less. I followed the same instructions for the white burlap. It is a bit larger, so my squares will end up being 3 inches instead of 2.5. If you prefer and you only have one size of burlap, you can have all your squares the same size. I chose these colors for my burlap because I wanted to keep my tree neutral, but you can always change it up, use one color or multiple colors. Now that I have my squares cut, it's time to attach them. I'm using one of the Dollar Tree wooden skewers, and I'm poking a hole large enough to fit my burlap in the cone. You can start with either color. I'm using the natural. I'm folding it in half and then in half again to make a square. I add a dot of hot glue into the hole. Now using my skewer, I'm tucking the corner of the burlap into the hole. From there, I followed the exact same instructions for the rest of the cone. I make a hole with the skewer, fold my burlap in half and then in half again, add the hot glue, and tuck the corner of the burlap into the hole. As I was adding the burlap, I didn't have a specific pattern. I just kind of added the colors in here and there. With my first row complete, I continued working my way up. You will have some fraying with the burlap. I actually like the look, but I did clip away some of it with my scissors. As you're adding on the burlap, they can be close together or you can have a little space. The most important thing is to just make sure that the cone underneath doesn't show through. After all the sides are complete and I've made it to the top, I'm using my skewer and I'm placing about 3 holes or so into the very top of the cone. I added on some hot glue and then tucked in 3 pieces of the folded burlap. All the burlap is added and I'm using my scissors to shape the top of the cone into a tree. To finish up my rustic burlap Christmas tree, I'm adding a tin star to the top. I found its placement and then attached it with some hot glue. And with that, my 3 rustic farmhouse Christmas trees are complete. Here we are at the end of the video, and I really hope you had fun crafting with me. Please be sure to check out the Christmas in July playlist. I'll have that linked below in my description. If you're new to my channel and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. I hope you all have an amazing day. Be safe, and I will see you soon. Bye, everybody!